Hello, hello. Happy Friday. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to my final video of this training on story structure. I am going to talk about Act 3 today. If you haven't had a chance to watch the previous two videos on Act 1 and Act 2, some of what I'm talking about may not quite make a lot of sense. So I recommend just going back to those two videos and see, and then because I'm talking about it in the terms of how the story arc will how it evolves from Act 1 to Act 2 to Act 3. If you're on, say hi, and if you're brand new to me, my name is Kate Johnston, and I am a writing coach and a creativity mindset coach and an editor. I work with developing writers and experienced writers to help them tell the story to the best of their ability. And I especially love working with writers who want to improve their skills, who want to grow and flourish in their creative lives. I also work with small businesses and I help them with their web pages and just the story that they want to tell to grow their particular audience and grow their business. The other thing I do with editing is I love developmental editing, content editing, and I also do copy editing. So I pretty much have my fingers in a lot of different areas of writing, and it's because I love it so much. So that's why I'm doing this training too, is because there have been a lot of people asking me about structure and beginning, middle, and end. And hey, Peggy, how are you? Glad to see you here. Um, and so I thought, doing a training would be really helpful. And this is really just a very basic, bare bones training because structure is convoluted, to say the least. There is a lot that goes into structure. And I teach 3-act structure, but as I was talking about yesterday, that some people may need to break up that middle because it's so long and can be cumbersome. And if you break up that middle into 2 smaller sections and hinge it with that midpoint, then you end up working with 4 acts. So but that doesn't change where your plot points are. It doesn't change the role of your plot points. So everything pretty much works the same way. It's just sometimes it's easier in our brains to have 4 smaller acts versus 3 kind of big acts. So that was one thing we talked about yesterday. So today is Act 3, and Act 3 is known as the action act. I also refer to it as the fighting back act, where your protagonist finally gets the information that he needs or she needs in order to do what needs to be done to get the story goal or to, solve the mystery, to accomplish what he set out to do back in Act 1, okay? And there are 2 major turning points in this act. The first one is called the second major dilemma, what I call the second major dilemma, and you might know it as all is lost, the dark night of the soul. And then the second major turning point is climax. Second major dilemma is usually around the 75th percentile of your book. So we talked about how your plot points really kind of need to be placed in particular positions in order to help you build that narrative arc so that your characters there's a momentum going. And if you aren't placing your plot points in the approximate position, your story will feel off. A lot of this is just because we're so used to how stories are written. They're written in a certain way with that beginning, middle, and end. And there is something to be said for structure and how we're just tuned into the way stories are told. So to disregard where those plot points are located is to your detriment. And again, it's not exact. It doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be, at that particular page, wherever that 75th percentile is, it has to be right on that page. You certainly have leeway. It's just a matter of making sure that you have it in the right place, because your reader will be ready for it. Okay. I got a question yesterday, which was an awesome question, about if you have more than one perspective, if you have more than one character who has a point of view, do they have to meet those turning points at the exact same time? No, they don't. The thing, but there is a little concession to that. So like I said, with your turning points, they hit your story at certain points. Like midpoint is 50th percentile. Okay, that's the middle of your book, so that's kind of like a no-brainer, right? If you have two POV characters, they are going to have their own character arcs. You have to give them arcs, which means that you have to give them goals, and they have to have a ghost that they're dealing with. They have to have a belief system that's based on a lie, all that stuff that's part of your character. They're each going to go hit that midpoint at their own time, but it might be a couple of chapters behind. Like your secondary character may not hit his midpoint until a couple of chapters after your primary POV character, and that's fine. Just be sure that they do hit, each of them hits a midpoint, and each of them has an inciting incident, and each of them has that hits their own version of the climax of their particular story arc. It's very possible they may have the same climax. They may come together at the end and be in the same climax together, but they don't have to be. They could have their own climax that pertains to their own story. Totally depends on the story that you want to tell. So just as long as you know that if you have a POV character, and if however many POV characters you have, they each have to have their own story arc. Okay, so Act 3 is all about actions, all about fighting back. So at this point, your character, when he hits that second major dilemma, which is at the 75th percentile of your book, he's going to lose something that's extremely valuable to him. And it's going to be big. It's his rock bottom moment. The best rock bottom moment has to be when he loses something that is in direct relation to his story goal. It's called it's basically a defeat moment, okay? If you have him losing something that doesn't affect his path towards his story goal, then it's not going to be the second major dilemma. It's not big enough. So he has to lose something that's going to impact his path toward his story goal. And it needs to be a result of something that he has said or done along the way. The reason for this is all based on the lie that he believes. That belief system that we talked about in the previous two videos about, why he, that flaw that he's been dealing with all along, and he's in denial, or he's trying to find workarounds. He doesn't want to change. He wants to keep the status quo throughout Act 1 and Act 2. That second major dilemma forces him to realize he's got to change no matter what. And so the stakes have to be super high. An example, just off the top of my head, if you have a POV character who is a treasure hunter, and maybe he's dealing with a marriage that is failing, and it's failing because he goes off frequently to hunt for treasure, and he wants to save his marriage, and he's telling himself, well, if I find that big treasure, that one elusive treasure that I've been searching for my whole life, it will save my marriage. So this will be like his belief system that's based on a lie. And he keeps telling himself this. And so what that means is throughout Act 1 and Act 2, he's holding on to this belief system so that he can still achieve his story goal, which is to find the treasure, which is truly a personal goal and really doesn't have anything to do with saving his marriage. But he's telling himself it will save his marriage because that's the excuse he needs in order to, so that he doesn't give up the love of hunting treasure. Okay, that's, and so it's a person, that want, that story goal is very personal. It's the one thing that he wants more than anything in this world, even at the risk of losing his marriage, because he's telling himself, well, my wife won't leave me if I find that treasure, so I'm just going to keep going, and I'll just satiate her along the way. And so that then, at that second major dilemma of Act 3, what would really make a lot of sense in this particular story that I've just provided, the storyline, the wife moves out. She's had it. He might be off in, Asia somewhere searching for treasure, and she's back home in Indiana, and she packs up and moves out and serves some divorce papers. And he finds out, and and he's like stuck. That's his rock bottom moment. That would make sense because all along he's been telling himself, I'm searching for treasure and this will save my marriage. Now he realizes he is confronted with the reality of his belief system, that lie he's been telling himself, that he has single-handedly ruined their marriage based on his actions. This is how you ultimately bring that character development to a structural plot point based on an event. This is really, really important. This is why setting up your plot points and then weaving in your character development to kind of match up with those events is really important. You have to know the role of these events. If you don't understand the role of the events, then you're not going to be able to set up the perfect event for that moment, nor will you be able to develop your character in such a way that he's growing, either towards that positive arc, or a negative arc, depending on, obviously, depending on the story that you're trying to tell. So knowing that this is his, rock bottom moment, all is lost moment, that should tell you, okay, you've got to kill off the best friend, right? Burn their house, have a divorce, whatever it means that is total consequence to their actions. So they're going to sit with that for a minute. That's their revelation. Okay, so that second major dilemma has kind of like a two-part thing. It's a defeat and a revelation. So he's defeated he's lost something. The revelation comes when he realizes, wow, this is because of how I've been acting. And he finally, finally, he breaks through to the light and understands, this is what I've done. And this is the whole thing that I've been trying to avoid throughout Act 1 and Act 2, and now I've done it. What do I do? And this is when you want to, I mean, totally depends on your story. If you're on a positive arc, it's his reaction and what he does next will be different than if he's on a negative arc. Okay, so if he's on a negative arc and he does not learn from this lesson, okay, that means that he loses the greatest thing, or the most valuable thing to him. He still continues to serve that lie and does not learn his lesson, and we've got a negative arc. Versus a character who's on a positive arc, who will learn from it and will make the necessary change in his character. That lie, he'll finally decide, okay, I have lost everything, but I need to do this still, even though I think it's not gonna matter. I need to make up for it. I need to learn, maybe I can make this one change that will help somebody else, whatever your story is, which is the action he needs to take in order to get to that climax. Okay, so we've got the second major dilemma, which is at the 75th percentile of your book. Okay, so that's the big turning point that kicks off Act 3. Climax is the next big turning point, and your climax is basically the showdown moment of your showdown. The whole everything kind of comes together for your character. This is the moment that all of your readers have been waiting for. Do not disappoint them. If you have pretty much set up in Act 1 that your character is going to have a battle of some kind, you need to follow through with that and give your readers that battle. This goes along with that Anton Chekhov quote, where if you introduce a gun in Act 1, make sure you fire it, make sure it goes off. I'm butchering this quote, but I think it's so famous, you probably know. And if you don't know it, let me know and I'll find it exactly for you. But this is what he's referring to. You do not want to set up your readers for believing that your protagonist is going to do something or deal with something and then not do it by Act 3. It's not, because this is what you've been luring your readers to this moment. It has to come to a head at your climax. So what this means for you is you have to understand that the climax is where everything happens. It all comes to a head, right? Whether or not they win or lose, it doesn't matter, okay? What is most important is that you bring it to your readers. And you need to have it so that it's life-changing. Your hero is finally in a situation where he understands, no matter what, I have to see this through. And your readers aren't quite sure what's going to happen. And that's where you don't necessarily give everything away, because your hero could still fail. That's why we keep reading, because you don't want it to be predictable. So you want to set it up so that he's in the situation, and he's finally ready to put his heart on the line, his life on the line, whatever on the line. And we don't know if he's going to succeed or not. With a positive arc, he'll succeed in some way. Okay, he may not get everything, he may not succeed in everything, he may still fail in some ways, and that's okay. Again, basically what, no matter what, your reader has to be satisfied by the ending, and the climax is a huge part of that. So however you're setting up your readers, make sure that there's a huge payoff at the end, because your readers are going to be expecting that showdown, and it's got to measure up to everything that you've set up through Act 1 and Act 2. If you have prepared your readers for a big battle, of whatever the battle might be, it happens at the climax, and do not let your readers down. During that climax, your character, he may lose, but it doesn't matter, because he's been transformed. So even if externally he doesn't get what he wants, think about that story goal. So we're going back to my example of the guy with the treasure. Maybe he never gets the treasure. Maybe he decides they're just about to go get it. Maybe they're just about to go like spelunking to find that treasure. But in his brain, he's like, my wife, she's left me. And if I stay here 1 minute longer, I've lost her forever. And this is his conflict. And he needs to make a decision. And who knows? Your readers don't know. They shouldn't know what he's going to do. But whatever he does has to make sense. Okay? It has to make sense to your readers. They have to be satisfied with his decision. This is all based on how you set up, how you grew your character from Act 1 into Act 2 and now into Act 3. He has to measure up to his growth. His actions have to fit everything before. And so maybe he doesn't decide to go get the treasure. Maybe he's like, team, I have to leave you. You guys are just, I'm gone. I have to go get my wife. I can't do this. And leaves and flies back to Indiana to find his wife. Maybe, depending on the kind of story you're trying to tell. Regardless, you need to have that conflict at the climax. You have to put him in a situation where where he is, no matter if he loses, he still does, he follows through with what is most important, with that transformation, okay, that need. So it's not so much that want, that story goal, that treasure is suddenly not as important as what that transformation that has to happen here. And then he makes a decision from here rather than like greed or blind desire. Um, if you have a sequel in the works, and this is really, really important, and I do a lot of creative writing with children, and they always make me smile. And I miss working with them. I was supposed to be teaching them now, and of course, school has been canceled, so I can't do it. But anyway, one of the things that kids love to do is leave their stories on a cliffhanger and say to be continued, right? And I'm sure you can picture a kid doing that right now, to be continued. And the story really, the story has not finished at all, right? It's it's they've left lots of things happening or hanging. Loose threads are hanging. Tons of plot holes. We're really not sure what is going on. We can't do that. And like for a true, you can't do a to be continued for your audience. Even though a sequel is in effect, meaning that the story is continuing, you have to wrap up that first story that you have told, that you started telling in book one. So what that means for you as a writer, if there's book two or book three or whatever, you must have a resolution for the main story that you introduced in your first book. Do not leave anything unfinished if it means that we still don't, if your character has not completed his story goal. I like to use Harry Potter as an example for this. There were, I think, 7 books and 8 movies, I forget. From each book took place during a school year. So J.K. Rowling had a really wonderful timeline to work with. She knew, okay, each book has to be a school year. So she kind of knew in her head what that meant. That also meant that whatever the story goal was, it was a smaller story tucked into the larger scope of the Voldemort coming back and trying to take over the world. That was the larger story, but that story needed all 7 books to evolve. Harry, in order to defeat Voldemort, has to get to that point. He has to grow, and it's not going to happen in book 1 because he's brand new to this whole thing. So what J.K. Rowling had to do is give him story goals that he could achieve within 1 book at a time. And each of those story goals builds upon each other from book 1 to book 2 to book 3, so that Harry is getting stronger. He's getting closer to understanding the lie, his own ghosts, his own limiting beliefs, so that by the time it's book 7 or whatever number it was, he is ready to battle Voldemort. He's not ready in book 1. So, but he has to achieve some kind of a story goal within each book. And what ends up happening with a series like that is you still have your protagonist achieving a story goal. You know, that there's a problem that's introduced in your first act and it has to be resolved in act 3. What you do with a sequel, though, you still resolve that first problem, but there's an inciting incident that you include in act 3 that kicks off a new problem for book 2. That's how you handle it. So you still finish off and tie off all the loose ends for book 1, but introduce a clue or a foreshadowing or some kind of little thread in Act 3 that launches the problem in book 2. All right. That's really important. So you have to set up like that, those small clues in your current book if you're going to have a sequel. Otherwise, they'll feel too episodic and they won't feel like they're part of a series. They'll feel like, oh, book 1 could stand alone and everything is done, and book 2 could stand alone. Nancy Drew series, perfect example. Nancy Drew, even though there's there was like 40, 50 books, but they weren't part of an actual ongoing series. They're each standalone books, and every single book you could read them out of order, versus a Harry Potter where you could not read them out of order because there was an overarching story goal that hooked them all together. All right, so then as far as when we talk about the theme throughout is based on your character's belief system. And so your theme, remember we talked about, we don't want to bang your character over the head with your message. So are you entertaining, inspiring, or educating your readers? Or are you doing a combination of two or all three? How does the theme evolve through into Act 3? Well, it has a lot to do with back at the second major dilemma when he has lost everything and he has to face that lie that he's been telling himself. That is your theme coming through. And again, we want to keep it understated. So how do you throw in that theme in throughout Act 3? Well, it just comes through your character's development, the lesson that he's learning, and that he finally the transformation is complete for him. And I think it was, did I say Love Conquers All? It was a possible, like an example of a theme yesterday. So Love Conquers All, oh, that could actually work with the treasure hunter. So if he gives up hunting that treasure, leaves his team behind and goes to find his wife, and that theme, Love Conquers All, totally comes through there. You don't even have to state it. It's obvious based on your character's understanding of his lie, his willingness to change, and then the action that he takes. So this theme then will just play through your Act 3. Now, if he goes after his wife and she said, "I'm sorry, it's too late," then that theme, how would that theme play out? Well, again, this is all dependent. That's why it's so important to understand how your story is going to end before you even start writing it, because then you can set up your theme appropriately so that it makes sense along the way. Your theme, Love Conquers All, isn't going to make a lot of sense if your character is in a negative arc and doesn't get the girl at the end. And then he's got the treasure and he's sitting at home with his treasure all by his lonesome. so your theme wouldn't stand up to the test of the story, which is why, again, and I can't reiterate this enough, knowing how your story ends is really, really helpful to know how you're going to begin it. And I know, I think it was in video 1 where I talked about pantsing versus plotting. It's a big controversy in the writing world, and it's actually very, it's a conversation that deserves its own video, because there are pros and cons to both pantsing and plotting. One of the cons to pantsing is what I just talked about. If you don't know your ending, then you could be starting your story in the wrong place, so that by the time you get to the ending, it doesn't fit. There's no arc. The arc that you have isn't logical. Your character motivation will be weak, or it won't make sense at all. So that's a con to pantsing. Uh, and not that it can't be fixed, because yes, it can. Revision will fix it, but you're doing twice the amount of work. You're basically doing the same job twice. So so just keeping that in mind, knowing your structure, even if you can just get your plot points figured out, if that's like the most you can do to help you at least get that arc in, and then you can start pantsing to your heart's content, but you have like the pins in place and landmarks. I consider your plot points as landmarks, because each plot point serves a particular job, and only certain events are going to fit that job. So knowing what that all is and what your character is going to do, is he going to get the girl at the end or not? Is he going to, is he on a positive arc or a negative arc? Those things matter. If you know that at the end, it'll help you with your beginning for sure. It's a big difference than just going and writing something that you don't even have an arc to. Okay, it will save you a lot of time. So that's pretty much, and then you've got the finale. Okay, and the finale is just, the closing scene. So you need to absolutely have all your loose threads tied up, and you need to make sure that your characters, if there's any explanations that need to come through for your reader to understand how they solve the mystery, for example, you need to make sure that that information is given to your reader. One thing that you absolutely need to avoid, and this is something that was common in older stories, is Deus ex machina. Okay, so that's the hand of God, and you want to avoid doing that. And what that means for you is the hand of God is literally the hand of God saving your protagonist at the end of the story, rather than the protagonist figuring it out for himself and solving the mystery himself, or killing the antagonist himself. If you have events like magically happening without any prior grounding or any introduction prior to this to explain why suddenly there's magic, or something that suddenly a character, this is a popular one that I see a lot. You get to Act 3, and you've got your protagonist is in a pickle, and he can't figure out how to beat the antagonist. And then at the very last minute, his partner, who was presumed dead, suddenly comes onto the scene and is able to help your protagonist beat the antagonist. And yeah, don't do that. Okay, if you need first of all, it's really, really a good idea. Your protagonist needs to beat the antagonist himself. He needs to be the guy, she needs to be the girl who solves the problem at the end. It's okay if they get help, but they need to be the primary person who solves the problem. If you have a partner who was, like I said, presumed dead, coming back to life, like, oh my gosh, I thought you were dead. Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Thank gosh. Then you've got a problem, because it's going to be obvious that you didn't plan your story very well. Avoid that as much as possible. And this, again, is a really good reason why we plot out our big story events first before we start writing, because then that's something we could figure out for ourselves. Oh shoot, I've got my character, he's in the climax, he's battling the antagonist, and I don't know how he's going to do that, because his magical powers aren't back. He hasn't been given his magical powers yet. And so he has really no way of beating the antagonist. How am I going to fix this? If you know that you're in that bind before you start writing your story, that will help you, because now you know, okay, I got to make sure that I have set up a plan B for my protagonist so that when we get to this climax, he can resort to plan B. But plan B won't be believable if you don't introduce it prior to the climax. Otherwise, it looks like Deus Ex Machina. All right. Okay, so let me see if there are any comments or questions. I don't see anything, so that's good. That means that everybody's understanding, and I'm just checking my phone too, because sometimes the comments don't come through on my laptop for whatever reason. I don't see, because that what happened the other day, and or if you are in the mid, this will give you an opportunity actually to type something in, because I am searching my phone. If you have any questions or not really sure, okay, so it looks good. I can hear myself on my phone. Okay, so that's pretty much the structure for Act 3. So really, you want to satisfy your reader. Okay, you want to make sure that you are writing an ending that satisfies them, but also surprises them. This has everything to do with how you've set things up in Act 1 and Act 2. And having that defeat moment during the second major dilemma with a subsequent revelation will help you with your Act 3, because now you've got your character. He is ready to face his fears. He's ready to confront the lie he's been telling himself. He's ready to make those changes. And that will help him be strong enough mentally and emotionally to deal with the climax, because at this point he holds himself responsible. He realizes, you know what, the whole reason we're here is because of my stupidity, or because of my greed, or because of my inability to face the truth. So it's up to me to deal with the antagonist, and I have to do it by myself. And that's your climax. But he can't logically do that if you don't have that growth that occurs throughout the entire story. So having things plotted out, even if it's just your major turning points, and all that stuff that understand what has to happen to your character throughout, if you just do that first, it will help you so much, because then now you have landmarks, and as long as you know the job that each of your turning points brings to the table. So you know what your midpoint does, and you know how your character is supposed to respond to your midpoint. You don't worry about it being formulaic, because what prevents it from being formulaic is the fact that you have a character who your readers are connecting to and relating to emotionally, and your character should be unique anyway, right? So we're not going to be able to predict anything, because your character is unique, and every character is going to respond in a different way, because that's their wants and needs are going to be based on who they are, their makeup. And again, it all comes back to how you set things up in Act 1 and how they grow from there. I will be taking this into my group, Team Writer, later. So if you want to be thinking about this, or if you're watching the replay and you realize, oh, you know what, I wanted to ask about that, definitely find me on Team Writer and ask me those questions that you need. And so that's all I got for you. So I hope that you found this helpful, and let me know, especially, what else would you like to know more about structure, because this was just a very basic overview, and there's a lot more that we can talk about in terms of structure. So, if you're feeling a little bit like I need more information on character development or I need to understand something else, let me know because I'm happy to do another video training on that and put something together for you. All right. All right. So I hope you guys have a really great Friday and get some writing done. Please get outside and breathe in fresh air. I don't know what the weather is like where you are. It's amazing where I am today, and I'm very excited about it because it's spring and I love spring. And I hope you guys are all doing well and your loved ones are all doing well. All right, take care.